So 25 biggest box office bombs of this year. Lost literally billions between them. I've got Marvel here, all the films they did this year flopped. I've got Tron, Snow White, lots of Disney trash, and a couple of movies that cost insane amount of money, way more than they should have. And there's at least one movie that lost so much money it could very well tank its studio. James L. Brooks came back after 15 years of nothing, and 20th Century gave him $35 million to make a romantic comedy about a female governor. This is the guy who made Terms of Endearment and As Good as It Gets, so there was at least some curiosity here. They released Ella McCay on 2,500 screens, and it made under $2 million opening weekend. That's one of the worst wide releases in American history. Here's the thing though, the studio knew this was going to bomb. Brooks hasn't had a hit in almost 30 years. They read the script, they knew what they were getting into. So why make it? Word is they cut a deal with Brooks. He gets to make his movie, they get him to develop a Simpsons movie sequel. That sequel's coming in 2027, and apparently that's what the studio actually wanted all along. Ella McCay bombed so hard that France canceled the release 2 weeks before it was supposed to open there. The movie ended at $4 million total against a $35 million budget. But 20th Century got their Simpsons sequel out of it, so from their perspective, they probably came out ahead. They just had to burn $30 million to make it happen. Glenn Powell's been in big movies, but he's never proven he can carry one by himself. Top Gun Maverick made over $1 billion, but that was Tom Cruise's show. Twisters did well, but he was sharing the screen. The question was whether Powell could actually open a film on his name alone. Paramount spent $110 million finding out. They remade The Running Man, which is kind of insane when you think about it. The original had Schwarzenegger back in the 80s, and it only made $38 million on a $27 million budget. Not exactly a monster hit, but Paramount looked at that and decided spending $110 million on a remake with Glenn Powell made sense. The movie got moved to avoid Predator Badlands and ended up getting destroyed by Now You See Me instead. Made $68 million worldwide, dropped 70% its second weekend. Break-even point was somewhere around $260 million, which means Paramount's staring at losses over $200 million. Powell couldn't sell it, reviews were lukewarm, people didn't care about a Running Man remake. Edgar Wright directed this thing, and his next film's probably not getting anywhere near that kind of money. The best film of 2025 is going to lose a lot of money. Paul Thomas Anderson directing DiCaprio, Sean Penn, and Benicio del Toro. Critics calling it a masterpiece, going to sweep the Oscars. Spielberg told Anderson after watching it that the first hour has more action than everything else he's made combined. None of that mattered. It cost $175 million and made $205 million, which means Warner Brothers is in the red on it. Nolan made Oppenheimer for $100 million, and that thing made close to $1 billion worldwide. One battle after another cost $75 million more, and when you watch it, you're left wondering where the money went. It's not a visual effects movie, it's not packed with expensive set pieces. It's a character drama that somehow ate up a superhero-sized budget. The film needed around $300 million to break even, and there was never a realistic path to get there. And yet somebody at Warner Brothers looked at a politically divisive adult drama and decided to give it a $175 million budget anyway. That's some pretty bad math. Warner Brothers is for sale now, and Netflix might buy them, which would probably kill theatrical releases for good. When you're wasting money like this, maybe that's not surprising. Bong Joon-ho made Parasite, which won Best Picture and made about $50 million domestically. That was a huge success for a foreign language film. Warner Brothers saw that and basically gave him a blank check for whatever he wanted to do next. He wanted to make a deeply weird R-rated sci-fi movie based on a fairly obscure novel. The premise involves scientists making multiple copies of Robert Pattinson. After reshoots and everything else, the budget landed at $118 million. That's cheaper than a Marvel movie, but it's crazy money for an original film with a concept that's hard to sell. Bong Joon-ho isn't really all that famous outside of film circles. Robert Pattinson doesn't bring in audiences on his own. And then things got messy. Pon and Warner Brothers fought over the final cut. The release got pushed back so far that the movie didn't come out until almost 2.5 years after they finished shooting. When it finally released, the critical response was decent, but nothing special, and audiences gave it a B cinema score, which isn't good. It opened to 24 million overseas and over 50 million worldwide. For an original movie in today's market, those aren't terrible numbers, except the break-even point was around $300 million. The theatrical run ended at 133. Warner Brothers bailed on it incredibly fast. They sent it to video on demand just 18 days after it opened in theaters. That's one of the quickest surrenders for a wide release in recent memory. Julia Roberts used to be able to open a movie just by being in it. That stopped being true a long time ago. Amazon MGM spent somewhere between $70 and $80 million on this psychological thriller about sexual politics at a university. Roberts and Andrew Garfield were the leads. Roberts alone got paid $20 million. Where the rest of the money went is unclear because the movie shouldn't have cost anywhere near that much. Last year's Anora was made for $6 million and was significantly better. The domestic run ended somewhere around $5 million. People hated it. 35% audience score, see Cinema Score, and only 23% said they'd recommend it according to PostTrack. There were even angry opinion pieces about the movie's subject matter. A studio executive told Deadline that the climate right now doesn't support films that aren't franchises. Art films need a miracle at a festival and then another miracle during awards season. After the Hunt didn't get either of those things. Amazon can handle losses like this better than most studios. They just dump it on Prime and move on. But spending $80 million on a movie that makes less than 10 is a disaster no matter how you spin it. Julia Roberts got her $20 million though, so I guess it's a win for her. Paul W.S. Anderson makes a fantasy movie every few years, and it always bombs. Death Race lost money. The Three Musketeers lost money. Monster Hunter lost money. This has been his pattern for over a decade outside of the Resident Evil franchise. So when he decided to make another fantasy epic, this time based on a George Martin short story, there was no reason to think it would work. But somehow he got the Germans to give him $55 million. He cast Dave Bautista and his wife Mila Jovovich in this thing about a witch hunting for werewolf magic. It was stuck in development for years. At different points, they were trying to get Keanu Reeves or Nicolas Cage. Eventually, they went with Bautista. When it came time to market it, they pushed this angle about how it was the first film with more digital actors than real ones. Nobody cared about that. The movie made $3 million against a $55 million budget. But apparently George Martin loved it, so that's something, I guess. Lionsgate's whole strategy is to make 10 mid-budget action movies, hope one of them hits like John Wick did, and use that to cover the 9 that tank. It's not a terrible plan on paper, but when you're watching it play out in real time, it's painful. Shadow Force was directed by Joe Carnahan, who made the A-Team and Smokin' Aces back in the day. Nothing special but decent action movies. So there was at least some baseline competence here. It's about 2 former leaders of some elite special forces unit who violated the organization's code by falling in love. They go into hiding to protect their kid, then their old team comes after them. It's basically an R-rated version of Spy Kids. The movie currently has a 30% on Rotten Tomatoes. Lionsgate held it back from critics before release, which probably made things worse, though honestly I don't know if advance reviews would have saved it. Here's the real problem though. Mark Wahlberg, Jason Statham, those guys can still open mid-budget action movies theatrically because they have built-in audiences who show up for them. Kerry Washington doesn't have that pull for action films. And the movie itself looks like it was made for streaming, which makes you wonder why they spent so much money on it in the first place. So it made just $5 million on a $40 million budget. Lionsgate tried to be smart this time. They went back to their bread and butter. The John Wick universe. Ballerina is a spin-off starring Ana de Armas as a female assassin, set in the same world. And here's what Lionsgate somehow didn't realize. Nobody cares about a John Wick movie without John Wick in it. The franchise is Keanu Reeves. The whole thing is built around him. You can have the same world, the same guns, the same assassin mythology, but if Keanu's not there, nobody cares. Ana de Armas is great to look at, but that's not enough to sell tickets to a John Wick spin-off. The movie opened okay, but dropped 65% in its second weekend. Made just $9 million that week, and it never recovered. Final total was $137 million on a $90 million budget. Add in marketing, and it's a bomb. It's the worst John Wick movie performance-wise since the first one, which cost half as much. This one was supposed to be like a complete unknown from last year. A biopic about a legendary musician at a turning point in his career. Jeremy Allen White spent months learning to be Bruce Springsteen. Learned the guitar, the voice, recorded all the songs himself. The movie focuses on Springsteen when he made Nebraska. He recorded that album alone in his bedroom during the worst depression of his life. He was months away from a breakdown. The whole album is super dark, and people obviously didn't want that. They wanted the big stadium energy, the stories that made Springsteen famous. They didn't want to watch him sit alone in a room and deal with his depression while he made sad acoustic songs. The release date killed it too. They put it out in October during the World Series and NFL season. The people who'd actually want to see this movie are mostly over 45, and they go to theaters during the holidays, not in October, but the studio dumped it there anyway. It made $45 million on a $55 million budget. Lost $10 million before marketing. Tom Cruise did everything right. This was supposed to be his final ride as Ethan Hunt, and he knew what was at stake. He did more press for this movie than any previous Mission Impossible film. He was everywhere making sure people knew this was the end. Opening weekend crushed it. Best numbers the franchise had ever seen. Cruise got on social media, called it the weekend for the history books, thanked everyone. For a moment, it looked like the perfect send-off. Except they'd already lost. Production had taken over 2.5 years because of pandemic shutdowns and the Hollywood strikes. Every delay cost money, and by the time they wrapped, the budget had hit somewhere around $400 million. And we all know how this basic blockbuster math works. You need to make about 2.5 times your budget to break even, which meant this movie needed to hit somewhere between $800 million and $1 billion worldwide. No Mission Impossible movie has ever done that. Final Reckoning ended up making just under $600 million. In any normal universe, that's a huge success. But when you've spent $400 million making it, you've got a flop on your hands. There's this theory going around that Paramount and Cruise both knew profitability was impossible and just didn't care. Cruise has made them tens of billions over the years, so maybe letting him and director Christopher McQuarrie go all out one last time was Paramount's way of saying thank you. Very expensive thank you. Dwayne Johnson showed up at the Venice Film Festival and people cried. Christopher Nolan watched the movie and said Johnson gave one of the best performances he'd seen in years. For a minute there, Johnson was finally being taken seriously as a dramatic actor. Then the movie opened and made just $6 million. This was supposed to be Johnson's Oscar play. He had Emily Blunt, he had Benny Safdie directing, and he had a true story about an MMA fighter struggling with addiction. All the pieces were there. Early tracking suggested it would open around $20 million, respectable for a drama. Instead, it barely cracked $5 million. By the third weekend, it had dropped 82% and was basically done. Ended its run with $11 million domestic against a $50 million budget. And the reason seems pretty clear. People don't want to see The Rock depressed. They want him saving the world in Fast and Furious or cracking jokes in Jumanji. After Black Adam flopped, after Red Notice and Red One underperformed, people have figured out they only want Johnson in a very specific lane. A serious dramatic role is not it. There's no chance he's getting that Oscar nomination now. David Zaslav took over Warner Brothers Discovery in 2022, and one of his first moves was greenlighting the Alto Knights. $45 million budget, theatrical release, Robert De Niro playing two different mob bosses. Some executives at the studio apparently pushed back. Gangster movies haven't been a draw in years, they said. This was a streaming movie at best. Why are we spending $45 million on this? Zaslav pushed it through anyway, and then the movie opened with $3.2 million, one of the worst openings ever for a major studio release. Worldwide, it scraped together $10 million total. The producer, Irwin Winkler, is out there defending the film. He's comparing it to Goodfellas, saying Goodfellas didn't do huge theatrical business either but made a fortune on home video. He thinks the Alto Knights will have the same kind of long shelf life on streaming. Which is a take. Goodfellas is considered one of the greatest films ever made. The Alto Knights made $10 million and basically got ignored. The whole thing feels like Zaslav betting on nostalgia for a type of movie that people stopped caring about a long time ago. And his executives apparently told him that, but he did it anyway. $45 million later, here we are. Labor Day weekend, Jaws beat a brand new Darren Aronofsky movie at the box office. Jaws, from 1975, a 50-year-old shark movie outperformed the guy who made Black Swan and Requiem for a Dream. That's where we are now. Aronofsky wanted to make something different this time, not the heavy psychological stuff he's known for, just a fun crime caper. Entertainment for its own sake. He said his mission was to get people in theaters having a good time because that's what the industry needs right now. The movie had Austin Butler and Zoe Kravitz. It was shot in New York, which probably kept the budget from being even worse. Critics who saw it loved it. Some called it his best work since Black Swan, but it made $28 million worldwide on a $40 million budget. The problem isn't quality. The problem is nobody cares about adult-oriented, non-franchise movies anymore. You can have a prominent director, recognizable stars, good reviews, none of it matters if you're not Marvel or Disney or some established IP. Aronofsky himself said movies are expensive and they're not made for an audience of one, they need millions of people. This one didn't get them. Emma Stone shaved her head for this. Focus Features paid $45 million just to acquire it, and the production itself cost $55 million. So $100 million invested before anyone bought a ticket. It made about $40 million at the box office. Bugonia actually had Lanthimos' best opening when it went wide, better than Poor Things or The Favorite initially. They even did this promotion where anyone bald could get in free, had barbers at theaters for people who wanted to commit, expanded to 1,800 locations over Halloween weekend. None of it helped. Lanthimos' movies aren't supposed to make hundreds of millions. This is art house stuff. But Poor Things and The Favorite both ended up around $34 million domestic and made most of their money internationally. Over 70% of Poor Things' total came from overseas. The plan was for Bugonia to do the same thing, hang around theaters through award season, build word of mouth. But the problem is, Bugonia isn't Poor Things. It's good. Jesse Plemons is great, Emma Stone does her thing, it's beautifully shot. But it peaks in the last 20 minutes and doesn't have the same impact as Lanthimos' best work. Disney spent $270 million remaking Snow White. After reshoots, after everything went wrong, and when it bombed, they needed someone to blame. So they blamed Rachel Zegler. The controversy started before anyone saw a single frame. Disney cast Zegler, a Latina actress, as Snow White, which immediately drew racist backlash online. Then Zegler did interviews where she said their version wouldn't be about the prince saving her, that Snow White would be a leader instead of waiting for true love. She called the prince character kind of like a stalker. By the time the movie came out, audience sentiment was poisoned. It made $205 million worldwide. Disney lost around $115 million. And then Disney started leaking to the trades. Anonymous sources, almost certainly from the studio, painting Zegler as irresponsible and erratic during promotion. They used the exact same playbook they used with the Marvel's director Nia DaCosta, leaking stories about her inexperienced behavior after that film bombed. It's really simple though. Disney made a bad movie that nobody asked for, and when it failed, they needed a scapegoat. Rachel Zegler was the obvious target. Remember when they made this big deal about Sam Wilson taking up the shield? The emotional weight of it, the significance of a black Captain America, all of that. They made a whole Disney Plus series building to that moment. Then they made the movie and it flopped. It made $415 million worldwide and got a 46% on Rotten Tomatoes. For context, that puts it in Marvel's worst 10 performers of all time. Kevin Feige did a roundtable event after the film came out and basically admitted what went wrong. His exact words, "It was the first without Chris Evans." That's it, that's the problem, according to Feige. Not the troubled production, not the heavy reshoots, not the fact that they reportedly restructured the entire finale and removed key characters from the action. Not the CGI disaster of a final fight between Sam Wilson and the Red Hulk. Apparently, it just needed Chris Evans. And you know what Marvel's doing now? They're bringing Chris Evans back for Avengers Doomsday. I actually feel bad for Anthony Mackie here. They never gave him a real shot. Just handed him a bunch of shitty scripts, did endless reshoots trying to fix it, and when it didn't work, they just threw him under the bus and brought Evans back. This one's almost funny in how predictable it was. Marvel announces a new team-up movie with a bunch of characters most people don't know or care about. They're calling it the next era of the MCU. But nobody wanted that movie. We already knew during Black Widow that these characters couldn't carry a film. That movie was awful and people didn't show up for it either. Yet Marvel made Thunderbolts anyway, spent close to $200 million on it. And then it made $382 million worldwide. Disney had to name it in their investor report as a reason they lost $21 million in their content sales division. The break-even point was probably around $500 million, which means they're looking at a $100 million loss minimum for a movie about characters nobody asked for with no interesting powers. It's the second worst performing MCU movie ever, only beating the Marvels. Even Eternals did better. And the whole time Marvel kept acting confused about why people weren't showing up. You made a team-up movie with B-listers and no stakes. What did you expect? After two previous failed Fantastic Four movies, Marvel swore this was the one. This was absolutely worth seeing. They got Pedro Pascal, Vanessa Kirby, Joseph Quinn. They spent over $200 million. Officially. When you factor in all the reshoots, people in the know say the budget was actually north of $350 million. The movie made $521 million at the box office. If the official budget's accurate, it needed to hit at least $500 million to break even. It barely got there. If the higher budget number's real, and it probably is, it needed to hit $875 million. That didn't happen. The movie opened big because hardcore fans showed up. Then it dropped 80% in its second weekend. It couldn't get anyone except the diehards to buy tickets. This was supposed to be Marvel's first post-pandemic success at bringing a new super team to theaters after missing the mark with Thunderbolts, The Marvels, and Eternals. Instead, it became another disappointment in that lineup. The superhero movie craze lasted way longer than anyone expected, but I'm calling it now. I don't think we're ever seeing another billion-dollar superhero movie. Avengers Doomsday will be the real test. They're bringing everyone back, Evans, Downey Jr., the whole crew. If they can't crack $1 billion with that, it's over. Adrian Molina wanted to make a movie about being a lonely kid on a military base. He'd co-directed Coco, so Pixar let him develop this sci-fi coming-of-age thing based on his own childhood. It was personal, and apparently it meant something to him. Then in 2024, Molina left. And when he left, he took whatever the movie was supposed to be with him. Pixar brought in 2 replacement directors to finish it, and what came out the other end was this hollow thing that nobody could explain. Not a movie for kids, not interesting enough for adults, just this generic mess with some queer themes that seemed like they'd been added and then half erased. It was a movie about nothing. Lowest Pixar opening ever. And Disney's genius response was to post on social media telling people to stop complaining if they weren't going to theaters. As if the problem was audiences and not the fact that they made a shitty animated movie. Early 2024, Sony's at a film market and sees this package, a road movie with Colin Farrell and Margot Robbie directed by Kogonada. So they pay $50 million just to acquire it. And there's a $45 million production budget attached. Here's the thing about Kogonada. His entire career up to that point, every film he'd ever made combined, had grossed maybe $3 million at the box office. Total. He made small, beautiful art house films that almost nobody saw. So they're into this thing for close to $100 million before anyone's even seen a frame of footage. They schedule it for May, then push it to September like they're setting up a festival premiere. Except it never shows up at Toronto or anywhere else, just skips festivals completely. The marketing campaign was practically non-existent. One trailer in June, then silence. The movie comes out, makes $18 million total, gets a 37% on Rotten Tomatoes. Just completely miscast and badly written from the ground up. One of the worst movies of the year and one of the biggest flops. Sony just found out the hard way that not everyone's meant to handle a $100 million budget. They spent $105 million making Badlands. You can see it on screen, the whole movie's drowning in CGI. And they made every decision designed to maximize the audience. Massive marketing push, dropped it to PG-13 so teenagers could get in with their parents. Producers literally on record saying they wanted to make it feel like an R-rated movie without showing any red blood. It got franchise record opening with $40 million. Worldwide total is $184 million. And Disney still lost about $100 million on it. Predator's never been a billion-dollar franchise. These movies do okay, they have their fans, but they're not Star Wars. Studios keep forgetting that. This time, the international audience just didn't show up. Usually these things play way better overseas, but Badlands was almost split 50-50 between domestic and international, which is weird for this franchise. Even Alien Romulus, which people mostly hated, had a smaller budget and made more money. Jennifer Lopez hasn't had a hit since 2022. Her Netflix movie bombed, her documentary bombed, her album bombed. She had to cancel an entire tour last year after ticket sales tanked. So she makes this $30 million musical directed by Bill Condon, who'd done Dreamgirls and Beauty and the Beast. They premiere it at Sundance in January. Every major buyer's in the room. Netflix, Amazon, Searchlight. The reviews come out and suddenly nobody wants it. Eventually, Lionsgate and Roadside pick it up because they think it has Oscar potential. They're planning to campaign Jennifer Lopez for an Academy Award. They release it in October in 1,300 theaters. Opening weekend, it makes just $840,000. That's about $600 per theater. Bill Condon had specifically turned down Amazon to insist on a theatrical release. He felt it was a love letter to cinema that needed to be seen in theaters. Well, it wasn't seen in theaters. It made $1.6 million total and got dumped to digital. Josh Hartnett with a chainsaw on a plane full of assassins trying to kill him, and somehow they spent $40 million making it. Critics called Fight or Flight a glorified B-movie with a Hollywood lead, which is exactly what it was. And for about 24 hours, it looked like that might actually be enough. It even debuted with a 100% score on Rotten Tomatoes. Vertical put it in over 2,000 theaters, which for them was a massive push. But here's what killed it. The movie actually premiered on Sky Cinema in the UK back in February. It didn't hit American theaters until May. 3 months later. By then, it had been pirated everywhere. When you can watch Hartnett chainsaw his way through a plane from your couch for free, why would you go to the theater? Hartnett did all his own stunts, the action's genuinely fun. It's from the same people who made John Wick. But none of that mattered. It made just $4.3 million total on a $40 million budget. Ron Howard makes a period thriller about settlers trying to build a utopia in the Galapagos after World War I. It's got Ana de Armas, Jude Law, Sydney Sweeney, Vanessa Kirby. It premieres at Toronto, and then nothing. 8 months go by and nobody will distribute it. This is Ron Howard. The guy made Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind. He's got 2 Oscars, and he can't get anyone to buy his movie for 8 months. Reviews out of Toronto were mixed. 57% on Rotten Tomatoes, but that's not disaster territory. The real problem was simpler. It's a period drama with no action and a dark ending. Distributors looked at it and couldn't figure out how to sell it to anyone. Vertical finally picked it up with no minimum guarantee, meaning they weren't even willing to pay Howard up front for it. Then the movie leaked online 2 months before release. When it finally hit theaters, it made $1 million opening weekend, ended at $2.8 million worldwide. So basically, Ron Howard spent $35 million making a movie that barely anyone got to see. Disney looked at Tron Legacy from 2010 and thought, let's make a sequel. 15 years later. Joseph Kosinski made Tron Legacy as his first movie, then went on to direct Top Gun Maverick, which made over $1 billion. So when Disney finally greenlit another Tron, you'd think they'd bring him back. They didn't. They borrowed some visual ideas from a sequel he'd been developing called Tron Ascension, then completely changed the story. Kosinski later said he doesn't even consider it a sequel to his film, he called it a parallel story. After Tron Legacy came out, there was momentum. The animated series was good, people wanted more. Disney went completely silent for 15 years. By the time they made another Tron movie, everyone who cared about Tron had moved on. The official budget is $180 million, but Deadline says it's closer to $220. Marketing was over $100 million on top of that. It opened okay, then dropped 70% in its second weekend. Final worldwide total is just $142 million. When you account for theaters taking half the box office, Disney lost around $150 million. I guess everyone saw this coming. The question was never, will it bomb? It was, how bad will it be? Turns out the answer was bad enough to kill the franchise for another 15 years. Steven Soderbergh made a spy thriller. Cate Blanchett and Michael Fassbender play British intelligence agents. There's a mole, there's a cyber weapon, and one of the suspects is the main character's wife. David Koepp wrote it after talking to actual spies. It's tight, it's 93 minutes, and it's got a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. Nobody went to see it. $60 million budget. Most of that went to paying Blanchett, Fassbender, Brosnan, and Soderbergh. Made $31 million worldwide. After 17 days in theaters, it went straight to video on demand. Soderbergh gave an interview after it flopped. He said something that pretty much sums up everything wrong with movies right now. This is the type of film I built my career on. If star-driven, moderately budgeted movies can't bring in audiences over 25 anymore, that signals a serious problem. Focus Features told him it'll eventually turn a profit on streaming, but that's not really the point. The point is these movies, the ones made for adults that aren't superhero or cheap horror, are dying in theaters. There's no middle ground anymore, and it's only going to get worse in 2026.